I'm out at Antelope Island, which is an island on the Great Salt Lake, which is in Utah. And I'm looking for birds and animals and even rocks for my paintings. I like to sketch, and sometimes I get the reference in the field and take them home to do it. And sometimes I do a little sketching out here. We'll see what happens today. So I obviously decided to sketch a little bit here on this really cool rock bench. It was a fantastic view, and I'm taking it slow today, not in a hurry at all. I'm sketching with a graphite carpenter's pencil. I like the wide flat core, and I cut it to an angle so it feels a little like a paintbrush to me. It's just kind of cool. So I'm going to sketch this for a bit. It's not an amazing sketch or anything, and that's not the main part of this video, because I'm going to transition into drawing a coyote that I saw while I was out here. And even though I'll do that sketch at home, I got the reference photo here. So while I enjoy sketching at home, I really enjoy sketching on location. It's fun, relaxing, and good practice. I highly recommend it. But feel free to sketch inside too, because that's what we're going to do next. Speaking of reference photos, earlier on this trail I sat on another rock and spied this coyote far into the distance. What a cool sight. Another coyote was spotted on my drive to the trailhead. He was far away as well, but this one was fairly close, and that is the one I'm going to use for reference for the painting we'll do next. Getting photos from the video is the best way to catch just the right pose, and when I found it here, I printed it out. And I used about the same size of printout as the paper that I was going to draw on, which was 5 by 7. This is Yupo paper, and I started using pencil. This pencil allows me to draw quite lightly at first to make sure I get all the proportions correct and get everything done. And I did a light sketch. And now I'm using some graphite powder. It was actually shavings from when I sharpened another pencil that I had and put them into a little cup. I'm using a foam brush here to spread that graphite onto this paper. The Yupo paper takes the graphite quite well, and it sticks really well, even though it's super smooth. For some reason the graphite stuck really well to this, so I was kind of excited to see that. I find out a little bit later that it didn't move with water either, so that was really nice. That way I can do a really precise underdrawing and get my values correct and in the right place. And you can see that I have darks and lights, and I really wanted to be able to paint over this. I'm going to be using Inktense pencils when I paint over this with color. But this initial drawing with pencil and graphite and these graphite shavings or graphite powder that I had worked really well, and you can see it just doesn't wipe away. I'm using a paper towel there. And I tried to put some water on it, and it doesn't move. So this is a pretty wet brush, and I'm just moving it and nothing changed. So I was really excited for that. So once I figured out the graphite was going to stay, I decided to do a little bit more precise details. This pencil I'm using here was actually one that I picked up when I was in high school many years ago in a drafting class. And the lead in it is a really hard lead, so it's really light colored. It's a 6H, and H means hard, and sometimes a pencil has a rating from a number like 2B, and B means bold, and it's a darker thing, and then H means hard. So this was a 6H pencil, and I used it a little bit to draw the things. And then I used some eraser to erase away so I could get some brighter marks for where I wanted to make sure it was not dark but colored. And using the eraser was really nice too. Now I'm back to that carpenter's pencil. So this carpenter's pencil was actually a mechanical carpenter's pencil. And I mentioned earlier when I painted the island that it was a wide tip, and I cut it so it was kind of a brush-like. It is a hardness, it looks like about a 2B, so it's a bolder, darker graphite. And you can see it looks darker on this painting, so that's nice. And now I'm introducing a blending tool. So this is kind of a craft tool. I'm not sure what it's made of, but it's kind of a foam tip, a hard foam tip. And it allows me to kind of blend and get sharp edges off of the pencil mark and kind of blend them back. So I'm going to go back and forth with that blender and the pencil, and I kind of want just a soft underdrawing. I kind of shying away from any hard edges. That's just a regular brush that I wipe off things. So now I'm getting to the fun part, which is the color. I'm using Inktense, and I wasn't sure what color to pick, so I had actually swatched all of these colors out on Yupo paper just to see what they look like. And I'm using a lighter yellowish color for the grasses. And I'm kind of coloring all around the grasses at the bottom and the grasses in the distance, and pretty tight drawing with it. I'm going to wet it later. But I wanted those grasses to kind of recede into the distance. So what this is a kind of a dusky purple, because I know that cooler colors, and that yellow was a warm color, and this purple is kind of a cooler color. That will make the distance look a little bit further out on the horizon, so it doesn't just look like a wall of yellow. And then the green colors are kind of the middle. It's not as warm as the yellow, but cooler than the green. And I'm mixing those in. And now this brush that I'm using is actually a craft brush. It was actually designed for glue. The bristles are really non-absorbent, almost plastically nylon-y. They're loose, but they don't absorb a whole lot of water. And that's nice because that way it won't lift the water off of the Yupo paper, and by lifting water off the paper, it also tends to lift off the pigment. But these brushes I found were really nice because they just spread the water and spread the pigment rather than fighting having it come off and back on. So I like that, and I was really glad that I found those. Just shopping on an aisle down in the craft store, and I found those. Now I'm just using my color chart to pick the right colors, and I'm going to start working on this coyote. You can see that the sun's coming in from the left, and so the dark shadows are on the right. So I'm using some darker colors to start to model the form of this coyote. I did that with the graphite as well, and I spent a lot of time making sure it looked, 3D-ish, I guess is what you would say, and it works pretty good. And those lines are different variations in the coyotes. How do you say that? Coyote or coyote? I say both. The coyote's fur, and I'm just going to put those in, but when I use the brush, it'll blind them out. Just like when I was doing the graphite, I'd put the graphite line down, and then I'd use that foam brush to smooth out the lines, and I'll do that the same with water. What I like with the water when I put it down is it eventually creates kind of a textured effect, almost abstract in its application. When you look really close, it's really cool because it has a lot of different expressive lines within it. So I'm spending a fair amount of time drawing pretty precisely with the Inktense. In past videos, I've always gone really light and quick, but this one I'm spending a lot more time being precise in my drawing. I can do that because I'm working from a photo. I'm not working outside and trying to beat the sun. This photo is static, and therefore the coyote is static. And so I like the idea of capturing photos in the field and observing the wildlife and seeing some cool shots, and then taking it home and taking my time and painting the painting. This brush here is also that same kind of nylon, but I cut it really short so that it's quite stiff, and I'm using very little water on this brush. and I wiped it off with my fingers. And because it's so stiff, I can kind of use some pressure to spread around the pigment. And it again, it's slightly wet, so it is activating the pigment, but it's not too much, so it's not going to spread around because there's too much water. And so it's kind of like drying. And you can see after I dipped it in the cup, I wiped it off with my finger just to get most of the water off the brush. But there's enough there that it's activating things. So I think that's kind of a cool thing I've learned as I've practiced with this Yupo paper. Is the Yupo paper perfect to draw on? No, not really. You saw some of my other videos where I've been practicing with this because I bought a whole pack of it, and it was been a fun challenge. And I've liked what I've learned. I've liked trying to experiment with different techniques and see if I can get what I want to happen. And so far, so good. I like how this one's turning out. And it's fun to take my time and try to do something with it. I'm working on this tail and getting the form of it so it looks like it's, not just a flat coyote. And that's kind of a back and forth process. This painting overall took 2 hours, and that was a long time. And I filmed most of it, or filmed almost all of it, and I wanted to show you a lot of the process that I did here. Will this video end up being 2 hours? No. I'll definitely skip back and forth because, that's just a long video. One thing that I like to do with this Yupo is sometimes when it's still a little bit wet on the surface from either the previous brush marks or using a spray bottle, which I'll do later, when the surface is wet and I put that pencil to the Yupo, it lays down darker, and so you can see that those last marks on the nose and the ear, they laid down darker, and that's because the surface was wet or moist. It had some water still on it, and that's a nice technique. And then you can go back in, and if it's too dark or too pencil-y, you can blend those away with a brush, and I'll show you how I did that here. But I'm trying not to use too much water, but I go back and forth with using more water or less water just to see what happens, because I know ultimately I can also remove a lot of the pigment off of this paper because it is a plastic and it doesn't absorb at all. And so a lot of this is just moving pigment on top of the paper. And I like the textures that I'm getting. I think it's a cool look. And it's definitely something that I'll probably experiment with it again. Will I use Yupo only for the rest of my life? No. I like trying new things too much. But it's been fun to experiment with different products and different materials. And I like the challenge of figuring out, how do I make this work? How can I make this do what I want it to do? And that's what's fun about exploring art. And so that's kind of what I like to show you on this channel, and the things that I like to actually experiment. And I hope that by doing so, it inspires you to experiment a little bit with what you do and with your art. I definitely don't feel like you have to use all the materials I use, but if it gives you some ideas, feel free. Lots of items at the art store, isn't there? Kind of at the stage of the painting where I'm fiddling a lot, and is that good? I don't know, but I'm learning, and I'm kind of observing, what's possible, what's working and what's not working. I think now I'm going to start working on that sagebrush, and it's a greenish, bluish color. So I'm using some teal blue and some yellows, and I'm going to just kind of lay those in pretty roughly. But because I have the texture from the graphite underneath, this color wash that I'm doing over top of the graphite, I'm still going to have those lights and darks there. So I'm kind of excited again about how this graphite underpainting works, and I think I can do that on other surfaces as well, including regular paper, as well as some treated paper or canvases that are treated with acrylic gesso or things like that. So I've done a lot of searching around of, do people paint over graphite? Of course they do pencil sketches when they do watercolor, but a lot of times people don't like seeing the graphite here. But I stretched it, and I did a lot of graphite, and that graphite painting of the Coyote was actually pretty detailed. So now you can see what it looks like to paint over that. And fortunately, the graphite isn't picking up much, so the colors are staying fairly vibrant. A lot of times if you were to do this on paper, the graphite would resolubilize, easy words to say, resolubilize, and it would make the paint more muddy and gray. But for whatever reason, it's working fairly well here. So I like that. And you can see that it's just kind of a light wash over top of the graphite. All of that drawing that I initially did is still intact, and I'm liking the results quite a bit. Can't see it very good, but this is a spray bottle, and I'm going to mist the paper with a fine spray bottle. And now when I put the Inktense down, you can see that it lays down so much darker. And I'm trying to just build in some really dark shadows so that the light parts of this bush pop out, because it gives it a more body to the bush to have these darks. These darks are laying down really dark. It lightens as it dries, so it won't look this dark in the end. And plus I'll kind of blend it down a little bit too. While I have it out and while the paper's wet, I'm going to darken part of that Coyote a little bit more on the side, on the shadow side, so that it pops out a little bit more. I like painting with pencil because it allows me to use the side of the pencil for some broader marks, or the very tip of the pencil for some really precise marks. And so that's kind of nice. I feel like I'm drawing and rendering more at this time than painting. And so do you call this drawing or painting? I don't know, it's both. These little brushes are used for model painting, and it's that same kind of material. It's kind of a plasticky, nylon-y feel, but they're small. And so I found these ones held a little bit more water than those initial glue brushes that I was using. So you have to be careful that you kind of control your water here. But I picked these up because they were a small brush and I wanted to try those. Another thing I do with these brushes, because I have so many of them and they're really inexpensive, is I'll take scissors or trimmers, if you will, and cut the brush so it's more angled or shorter, and it allows me to get different brush strokes with different types of brushes. So I'm not afraid to try cutting a brush just to get some different textures or different feels for it. This one I think was quite short. I cut it down from the longer one, and that was able to have a bit more control with the brush. You can see that I take my time on this part of the painting, and which is why it took 2 hours, because I wasn't in a hurry and I was just I was looking at my reference photo and I was just trying to see, okay, how can I make this, how can I render this bush to be more naturalistic looking. Did I make it perfect? No, not at all. But it was really fun trying, and I'm having a lot of fun painting. I think it's a cool hobby, and it's definitely something that once you get into the zone of doing it, you lose track of time. You just kind of get lost in painting, trying different things. Sometimes I didn't speed this up, show it to 10x speed or 2x speed or anything like that, because I kind of wanted you to see how long it actually takes to paint and how it pays off to be fairly patient in what you're doing. Sometimes these videos that go, they're just speed drawings. You think, oh, they did it so quickly. Why am I so slow? Well, a lot of these do go slow. It feels fast when you're doing it because you lose track of time, but it is a slower painting. This is a quite small painting. And yeah, I did it in some people's eyes, 2 hours would be fast. But that's a little bit slower. But I'll hop around and show you the good parts of this. Again, I'm not showing you the entire 2 hours. Sometimes it's a good idea to just walk away and let things dry before you keep working at it. And once it's dry, then you get a better feel for how it looks in its final state, because again, this Inktense is a little bit darker when it's wet. Another thing I like to do with the brush is I can actually remove paint with some of the more traditional brushes that absorb a lot of water, and you can lift the paint back off, and that helps correct some mistakes in some areas. You can hear the scratching sound. I'm kind of dabbing, and the paper's getting drier and drier the longer I go. And so it kind of is barely wet, and it's not lifting up the paint, it's just rounding off some of those sharper edges. Sharper edges of the pigment, I guess. I like a softer field. Paying attention to my edges and only having sharp edges where I want people to have a strong focal point, and softer edges where it's kind of background and different things. I like pulling some of the darks down into those grasses so the grasses look like they're, grass rather than just an abrupt end of that brush. This brush here is one of those that I did cut down. It was a longer brush to start with, and I cut it down using trimmers to make it an angled brush so that I could have a pointy side and also a long side. And it's shorter, so it's stiff, very stiff, and allows me to kind of lift or move paint a little bit easier. I misted this paper again with that spray bottle because I wanted some really darker pigments from the pencil again. But I'm really lightly drawing back on the Coyote, just the areas that needed a little bit more detail. And I'm using a more reddish English red brown on this to introduce some different colors or variations in the fur of that coyote's coat. And I'm just doing very light touches on the paper because, again, the paper is wet because of that spray bottle at this point. You didn't actually see it, but because the spray bottle was off camera, but I reapplied some of the spray mist over this, and now I'm able to get darker colors again. The advantage of using the spray bottle versus just using dry pencil on dry paper at this stage is the pencil will actually start to scratch away at the paint rather than lay down pigment from the pencil. Because this Yupo paper is really kind of a dance on how to work with it. So again, I don't know if I would recommend Yupo paper to the impatient, but if you're patient, it's a lot of fun. At least I think so. The cool thing about painting a furry animal is the textures that you can work with. There's a lot of cool textures in this Coyote. Some darks, some lights. It has a white underbelly, and there's white underneath the chin, and it's darker on top. And then, of course, the lighting effects of shade on one side and light on the other. It really is kind of a fun thing to use the water to help create the texture, because the Yupo paper, the pigment kind of just spreads in its own natural way. And I didn't have to draw each fur thing, but the water kind of spread the pigment around, so it appeared very fur-like. And I like that. I spent a lot of time on the eye. I did it, and then I redid it, and then I did it again, and I redid it. I never really quite felt like I got it the first couple times. This brush here is more of a normal watercolor brush. You can see it holds a lot more water. And because it holds a lot more water, it's diluting the pigment on the paper quite a bit. So you kind of have to get a feel for how they work. I think at this point I'm using it to lift off some of the pigments. And where I get the paper wet and put a lot of water down and then pull off the pigment with the brush. Just to kind of get the lights and darks correct and even soften some of the edges. But the top of the sagebrush is going to be lighter than the bottom of the sagebrush because the sun is in the sky, obviously. And so the sun comes down. So typically with trees and bushes, the bottom of your bush is darker than the top. Looks like I got the paper wet again here, and I'm using some yellows to get some brighter, more yellowy grasses in a couple places. The lighter colors I used earlier will contrast with these darker marks that I'm making here. And I'm going to just leave these pencil strokes the way they are because I'm using a darker orangish yellow on the paper that's been sprayed. So it's making some pretty cool marks that I like. It's good to be patient and not scribble too much and try to do specific strokes with the pencil, but not so specific that it doesn't look natural. So it's kind of good to take your time on this part too. Sometimes you get one in the wrong place, so you can always dab away with a brush to get rid of the ones you don't like. That one that looked like it was coming right off the tip of the coyote's nose, I got rid of. Partially, I'm using the brush to soften the bottom edge of those marks so that they look like they're blending into the ground they're coming off of. And the tops are a little bit more of a mark than the bottom, so they kind of look like they're coming out of the ground rather than floating in air. Back to the eraser here. This is a pretty stiff eraser, but it allows me to go back to the white of the paper fairly easily. And I like that because I want the darks to look darker by going back to white, and the contrast I think is nice. My eraser got a little dirty, so I cleaned it off by rubbing it on a white paper. I'm just detailing in the white fur of the neck of that coyote. I'm relying heavily on my photo reference here, which is off to the side. But I like that I can paint with eraser as well and kind of get back some of the lighter, wider areas by just erasing on this paper. That's the good thing about Yupo is that it does sit on top and the paint doesn't really absorb or stain. At least the Inktense does it, so it's really quite easy to just get things back to the paper. And I don't have any risk at all of it ripping or peeling like normal paper does. Those areas that I erased, I now misted the paper and I'm putting some brighter yellows on top of the whites that I just created because I wasn't able to put yellow on, the already painted surface because it would blend with the green underneath. But now I can kind of go in to say, okay, I have some new white areas. Let's make those more yellowy looking. So sometimes I erase just because I know I'm going to put a different color or pigment back on those erased areas. I try not to color all of it because I want some of the white to remain because yellow with some white tends to be more pop out a bit better. But that's what I was thinking when I did this part here. Like I said earlier, the bottoms of a bush or a tree are actually the darkest because it's shading itself. So I'm trying to get a lot more darks in this bottom area just to make it look like the bush has a rounder look than just a flat bush here. There's a couple of sticks pointing up or back behind the bush as well. And if you've watched my channel before, you know I like to use a battery-powered eraser. One of the things I like about this is I can get some really small eraser marks. And I'm using this eraser to put in some really brighter, almost white grasses, just to continue the look of texture of grass. So I'm pushing quite lightly, and I'm just similar to what I did with the pencil earlier, trying to just give the look of blades of grass coming up over the darker areas. Sometimes the eraser gets a little mucked up from the pigments coming off, so it's good to have a card or another piece of paper that you can kind of clean off the eraser by erasing on it. It's good to take your time on this and step back and look at what you're doing rather than just going too far and erasing where you don't want to. And also wipe away the crumbs, if you will, of the eraser with a clean, dry brush. I like the white highlights because it makes it kind of almost sparkle and gives it a lot more life to it. I tried to add a little highlight into the coyote's eye as well. Like I said earlier, I went back and forth on the eye, and so I'm sure I'll fix that multiple times throughout this process. I used a wet brush to kind of soften some of the lines by adding a little bit of water, and that'll kind of take away some of the sharpness and make it a little bit softer. No pun intended, but it's kind of an art of how to go back and forth of making things soft versus hard in your mark making. Not only did the eye give me fits, but so did the mouth and nose of the coyote. Once I would put water down, it would spread to be kind of too wide and it would spread out. So I'd paint it down and then I think, oh, that's too dark, and then kind of erase it away, and I had to just go back and forth on this until I felt like it was the right thing. Sometimes it's good to let things dry and walk away and give it fresh eyes before overworking it too much in just one session. I find that those brushes, if you get them wet, they'll lift up the pigment a little bit. So again, kind of a dance. I'm using a pretty small brush to get in these final details. And the brush isn't very wet, because I think that's important to control your water when you're working with water media. And I think it's important to go slow and be deliberate with your marks. I like to go fast and expressive, but towards the end I like to slow down and make sure I get things right. At one point I took a picture of the coyote painting and compared it on my phone directly with the coyote photo. Sometimes taking a picture allows you to see different things differently. And the photo isn't exactly how I wanted to make it. I'm not trying to be photorealistic, but I'm trying to make it look nice. And comparing it to the actual photo in the same size is a pretty good trick. Part of what that showed me is I had the nose too narrow, and I wanted to make the forehead a little bit more prominent than it was. It looked more like a fox than a coyote at some point. You can also just print out your paper and put it side by side and do the comparison there. So both ways of looking are correct or useful. You'll notice in the photo that the eye of the coyote isn't as prominent as I have it here, which is why I was frustrated with it, because I'd put dark marks down and then it would just spread and it looks like he's wearing makeup. So I'm diluting it, and at one point it looks like I almost erased it completely, but that wasn't right because I wanted it to be there. But I noticed there's a lot of shadow and different variations in the forehead. So I actually moved some of that pigment up to the shadow area that just stayed on my brush. And then I'll reuse the pencil to get that eye back in. This time I'll use just almost point of the thing. I sharpened the pencil really well, and the paper's wet, so it went down really dark. So I used the brush to kind of try to dilute it away, just very carefully. It's getting closer. I think I like how that looks the best so far. So I think I'll run with this one. But like I said, I went back and forth on that eye quite a bit. And it was good. You can always redo what you've done before. If you make a mistake, just keep trying. I also like to pull the pigment directly off the pencil with the brush and then apply the pigment from the brush to the thing. That lays down a lot softer than putting the pencil directly to the paper and then removing it with the brush. So it's a different technique that also works quite well. I'm using a quite dry brush to trim off the top of that coyote's nose. Some of it bled up and it started to get to be too fat. But that's the nice thing, again, that you can blend things away and fix your mistakes on this paper. I'm trying to make it look like grass by doing some long strokes. The dark part of the neck was kind of challenging. I'd get it too dark, and then similar to the eye, too light, and then too dark, and really a lot of back and forth on that as well. But I think I get closer each time I try. Putting the pigment directly on the brush and then painting from the brush at these final stages, like I said earlier, is helpful because it creates a softer mark than the pencil straight on the paper would. So I'm back to using the eraser again after everything dried completely, and I'm softening some of the areas. I'm not erasing it completely, but I'm kind of softening and making some lighter marks just with light pressure of that pencil. But if I wanted a bright highlight in the eye, I use the electric eraser. I like painting wildlife. It's such a cool subject. I'm going to try to do more and more of it because I like to go out and watch them. I like to photograph them. I like to take videos of them. And then I like to come back and try to recreate what I saw in a painting. So it's kind of nice. And I like the subject, and it's interesting to me. And I'm trying to do a little bit different format of these videos where I'm outside and inside together, and this one's a little bit longer, so I don't know if you guys will like that better or not. You'll have to let me know in the comments what you think about these videos and how they're going. Definitely creating these because it's fun, but also because I want to share and my experiences with you all and understand I'm not a professional and not an expert, but I'm just exploring art and having fun as I go. I'm definitely learning a lot as I go too. I did go back and use some dusky purple to kind of even increase those shadows in that bush even more. Back and forth, man. Takes a lot of trial and error to get the look that I'm going after. But I think I got pretty close on this, and I really enjoyed drawing this and painting it, and I enjoyed getting out to see the coyotes and see nature, and I in sketching outside and painting and sketching inside from the photo references I took. It's really kind of a fun experience and exploration of art. So I hope you enjoy watching these videos. I enjoy creating them. Let me know if you like this longer format, because some have commented that they would like to see more and longer videos rather than short ones. So I thought I'd try this, and hopefully it was as interesting to you as it has been for me. So I think I'm calling this done, and I'm going to take the tape off and enjoy the painting and also get out and paint some more. If you'd like to see some of my other paintings and enjoy the exploring art with me, check out these videos as well. Thanks for watching.